Hey everybody, welcome back. So the next part of the build project for the Gladiator is going to be to do the suspension. I've got the Teraflex 3.5 inch lift here. I also have the Teraflex Speed Bumps, and I also have Falcon fully adjustable shocks and Core 4x4 fully adjustable control arms and track bars. And so that's what we're going to get started on today. I got the shop dog Miles with me. He's going to help me out. Alright, so we got the Jeep up on the Max Jacks lift, got the wheels and tires off, and I've set the front axle down on jack stands, so that will allow us to start pulling things apart without the axle just dropping out from it. So we're going to get started here, loosening things up, start dropping things down, getting things out of the way so we can get the springs out, and then of course we'll have to cut the bump stop tube so we can install our bump stops. Of course, we got all new shocks to go in, all that good stuff. All right, so the first things we need to do, remove this bracket and pull that out. We need to disconnect the sway bars. We need to disconnect the vent hose as well as the electronic connection for the locking diff. And we need to loosen up the control arm bolts. I think we may also need to disconnect the front axle disconnect actuator line, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so we'll figure that out when we get to that. And of course we'll need to disconnect the shock as well. So we're going to get started on that. Looking through the instructions, looks like everything is pretty much all 18mm and 15mm nuts and bolts. So grab a 15 and an 18 and we'll get going on this. These factory sway bar end links are not going to be reused, so we can go ahead and just discard those. Alright, so I got the sway bar end links removed. I've unplugged everything. I've got the brake lines disconnected, the vent tube and the actuator for the locking diff. Got all the control arm bolts loose. I've got the shock bolts loose. On the other side here I have disconnected the track bar from the axle side of things. So next step is to actually remove the shocks completely, and then we can raise it up and pull the springs out and get started on the bump stops. The old springs are out. So now we can start working on the air bump stops. So to do that requires, obviously we got to remove the old bump stop here, but we actually have to cut this tube and then we mount it in there. So I'm going to get the instructions out for that, and we'll get that going here, and then we can start figuring out control arms and all the reassembly stuff here. So I got the jounce tube cut off on both sides, so now we're ready to install the speed bumps. So they'll go in like that. I need to coat the shaft with some RTV, and then there's a locking ring that goes up top on it. So we'll get that done, and that will be the extent of the install of the Teraflex speed bumps. So we'll get these coated in RTV, get them locked in place, and move on to the next thing. Alright, so we got the Teraflex speed bumps all installed. We'll let that RTV set up. Got it done on both sides. Clean that up a little bit better. But those are all done. So now, I think what we'll do is we'll start working on the control arms, getting those replaced. And then we can start going back together with the new lift springs and get this front end put back together. Alright, so I'm getting ready to install the Core 4x4 adjustable control arms. I've got the uppers ready to go, but I do have one gripe already. Number one, I had to email them to get these instructions. Nothing came with the actual kit. Here is all the hardware for the kit, but there is nothing specifying what anything goes to. In the instructions, it just says to insert bolt and tighten only finger tight. It doesn't say whether or not you're supposed to use the factory bolts in any of these locations, or which one of these bolts go to which component. So it's a bit of a guessing game for me at this point. I think I've got a reasonable idea. I think we do have new bolts essentially for everything, but we're going to find out. So this is a bit of a learning experience. Definitely think their instructions could be a little bit better here, but that's what we got, so we'll make do. So we'll get started on this and see if we can get these control arms knocked out. lower control arms. Alright, so there are upper and lower control arms loosely installed. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is with the Teraflex kit, there's a track bar relocation mount, and then I'll pull this track bar off and put the new Core 4x4 track bar on. Alright, so I got the bracket installed for the track rod bar. To do that, I did have to go ahead and install the bottom part of the new sway bar end link. So I've got that in. So I'm going to do the track bar after I get some other things done. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the springs in place next, and then I will start working on connecting the sway bar end links and get the shocks going here. So before I install the springs, I want to show you the difference. This is the factory front spring, and this is the new Teraflex front spring. So you can see it is quite a bit longer, and we've got the progressive at the top. So this is a dual rate spring. The rear springs are a triple rate, so I'll show you those when we get to the rear. Alright, so we got the springs in, the speed bumps, the bump stops, all the control arms, the track bar. Still have things to hook back up, but the next thing we're going to do is actually do the shocks. I've already gone through with the templates and cut out the holes for the reservoir as it comes through. So we are doing the Falcon Series 3 SP2 fully adjustable shocks, so you can actually adjust on the bottom here for they call it hot and cold, and then of course you've got the multiple adjustment up here. You got 1, 2, and 3, and in 2 you've got an additional 8 settings within sector 2, I guess is what we'll call it. So those are all fully adjustable. So we're going to get those installed on the front next, and then we can finish buttoning everything up on the front, get everything reconnected, all of our hoses and lines and everything for the front locker and the front axle disconnect, all that kind of stuff. So so we'll get these shocks installed, and that will pretty much wrap up the front end, and we'll move on to the back. Falcon shocks are installed. Only thing left is to finish hooking up all of our wires and everything. So it looks like I'm going to have to figure out a little bit of extra for the knuckle pod lights, but we'll get the vent tube, all these connectors done up, and then we can put the wheels on and we're all set.